Hello all of you wonderful people, Jules here for Whatculture.com, and today I want to talk to you about sequels, the building blocks of a franchise. I mean, getting a first sequel out there is actually a really difficult step. If the first film did really well, then people are going to be comparing the two with close scrutiny, and if the first film did poorly, then, well, A, why are you making a sequel, and B, you've had to learn everything you did wrong the first time around. Second album syndrome for bands is a known factor, and the same is true for films, often trying to do things bigger and better but only succeeding in belly flopping harder. And strangely, some films seem to commit the cardinal sin of switching their main stars to tell a new story, forgetting that one of the main reasons for the original's likely success was down to the film's main cast. So let's take a look at some films that tried the old swap-a-roo only to flop-a-roo all over the place. I'm Jules, this is Whatculture.com, and these are 10 sequels that stupidly changed the main character. Number 10. Lightning McQueen to Mater, Cars 2. Cars is one of Pixar's most underrated movies. It's nowhere near the best, but it's got a strong heart and some really enjoyable action sequences. Its plot was basically a message to slow down and appreciate the little things rather than chasing success. A message that its sequel Cars 2 only seemed to half listen to, as that film definitely chased cash rather than anything else. For some unknown reason, Mater was placed in the lead role and Lightning McQueen was sidelined. What resulted was over an hour of pratfalls and slapstick that only young kids could appreciate. And somehow, things went well enough to get a third film. Oh Lord, why? Number 9. Jack to Annie Porter, Speed 2 Cruise Control. The bus that wouldn't slow down is simultaneously revered as a so 90s it's good guilty pleasure and as an action classic, and trust me, it takes some effort to straddle those two lines. The plot is deviously simple, but the action and silliness within kept the film moving much like the bus itself at breakneck speeds. What did put the brakes on hard though was when the sequel decided to ditch Keanu Reeves and instead focus on Sandra Bullock's Annie, who was more than a bit bollocks in the first film and was totally off the wall in the sequel. It was a film that didn't need a franchise, and even the over-the-top hamming that was and still is Willem Dafoe couldn't save this sinking ship. If it was, say, anchored with Keanu, then maybe it would have stayed afloat, but there is a reason why this film holds a 4% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Boat pun. Number 8. Taylor to Brent, Beneath the Planet of the Apes. In Charlton Heston's Taylor, Planet of the Apes had one of the best, most fitting protagonists in all of sci-fi. He's an overwhelming cynic who spends the entire movie waxing lyrical about how all of humanity's probably dead and that it'll have likely been from our own hands. That is, until he takes that fateful trip down to the beach. Despite the roaring success, Charlton Heston didn't really want to do any more films for the franchise, yet reluctantly agreed to come back on 2 conditions. 1, that it would be the last one, and 2, he'd only take part in the movie if a new actor took his place as the lead. Enter Brent, another astronaut inserted into the film with all the care of a brick through a window, and whom the apes think looks exactly like Taylor because they're racist. All of this leads to an ape and human versus mutant battle. Yes, really, and while not terrible, felt so inorganic that it really was a shame to see the franchise slip so far, so quickly. Well, at least we got to see the world blow up at the end, so I guess that was something. Number 7. Clarice Starling to Hannibal Lecter, Hannibal. Hannibal Lecter is easily the most striking part of The Silence of the Lambs. Chianti, face masks, friends for dinner and all that jazz, but as you'll know from actually watching the film, he's not really in it that much. The story instead belongs to Starling, and what a story it is, easily placing her as one of cinema's all-time female greats. For reasons detailed and exhausted, a sequel was always planned but took ages to make. So long, in fact, that Jodie Foster dropped out and was replaced by Julianne Moore. Yet that wasn't the biggest change of them all, as the real shift was the focus of that from Starling to Lecter himself. This time, he drove the plot, and he provided a lot more gore. As a result, while the film was well received, it was viewed as entirely different to the first. At best, this was a good slasher film. At worst, it was the film that took the special, tense quality of the original and didn't know what to do with itself. And the less said about the prequel, the better. Number 6. Bud Fox to Gordon Gecko / Jake Moore, Wall Street, Money Never Sleeps. Wall Street is actually a bit like Silence of the Lambs, in that it was a movie whose villain became the biggest thing about it. The protagonist is Charlie Sheen's Bud Fox, who gets ensnared by Michael Douglas's Gordon Gecko before eventually turning snitch and bringing his empire down. But Gecko's charm and passion and greed made him one of the year's most talked about villains, and so when a sequel was announced, he almost inserted himself as a main player through expectation alone. However, the issue is that by making this shift, the plot demanded that he was given a redemptive hero role, something that didn't quite fit with his greed is good lifestyle from yesteryear. But weirder still was when Sheen reprised his role for a cameo part and the pair meet. What you think might become a brawl becomes a scene about the pair reminiscing about the good old days. Lads, you tried to destroy each other's lives! Or has all of that blow meant that you've forgotten that fact? Number 5. Obi-Wan Kenobi to Anakin Skywalker, Star Wars Episode 2 Attack of the Clones. Okay, as the Mr. Plinkett reviews famously pointed out, there isn't actually a clearly defined protagonist in The Phantom Menace. But let's use logic to figure out who it's intended to be based on things like, the posters and marketing. It's clearly meant to be about Anakin, seeing as the trilogy is about his fall, yet because he doesn't show up until halfway through the film, it's actually very much Obi-Wan's tale. I say this because he is the audience's most familiar character. He has a clear story, and his master is killed in front of him, meaning that he's now poised to grow in the next film. Yet in Episode 2, it is all about the Darth, with Anakin delivering stale as week-old bread lines in a manner more wooden than Pinocchio's privates, and boy, does Lucas botch that love story. He really should have kept the focus on Obi-Wan as the Jedi detective, because this stuff was the most interesting part of the film and shows Ewan McGregor's Kenobi at his best. In truth, it's an overall bigger problem with the prequel trilogy, as making Anakin the lead means that you are stuck telling a known story, so of course the telling of that tale is gonna struggle. Number 4. Alan Grant to Ian Malcolm, The Lost World, Jurassic Park. The original Jurassic Park had everything. You got gigantic dinosaurs that'll rip your arms off, and somehow you've got a set of characters that you actually care about, and at its center is the reluctant dino dad, Alan Grant. And yet, he's not the focus of the sequel. Okay then, well at least you get Jeff Goldblum. Wait, what do you mean that we're not going to give him any more character depth, and as a result he struggles to carry a film? Well, I'll tell you what, give him a kid, that'll help boost his likability, right? Right? Now, to be fair, the focusing on Malcolm wasn't the Lost World's biggest issue. That would actually be the complete lack of focus on what the hell is actually going on, but it is something which really tests the love and patience of fans of the series. But hey, at least we didn't have any Dream Raptors. Number 3. Walter to Kermit, Muppets Most Wanted. The Muppets as a brand is just something of pure brilliance. Their comedy, their colourful characters, it's all just so heartwarming. However, my heart almost stopped when the reboot dropped in 2012, as I was so worried that new guy Walter just simply wouldn't pass muster. However, simply put, it is an excellent film, full of the same nostalgic fun and clever little updates to the characters that make them feel relevant again. And thanks to Walter being the audience's guide, it makes everything feel welcoming. It's a shame then that Walter feels ditched the moment that the sequel begins. Set mere moments after the first film ends, this time Walter is just pushed into the background of the cast and Kermit takes the lead once more. It's an understandable change, seeing as the frog pretty much made the franchise happen, but it's a shame to see a now beloved character just simply pushed away. As a result, the sequel feels like, well, all of the other Muppet sequels. Good, but with nothing really challenging what audiences expect. Less of a step back, but nothing of an advancement for the series as a whole. Number 2. Steve Hiller to David Levinson, Independence Day Resurgence. Here's another follow-up that Jeff Goldblum wound up taking lead duties on simply because the real original lead chose not to come back, and the results? Well, this is the thing. Will Smith at his peak in Hollywood was the absolute best, and Jeff, well, he ain't no Will Smith. Goldblum is the arrowhead of the ensemble cast this time around, but he simply doesn't have the same charisma to hold everything up. His character has emotional links with all of them, but he never feels real, and the film fumbles on this level as a result. Levinson worked great in the original because he was isolated and able to tell his own story, but he's just not got enough to carry a full movie, I'm sad to say. And number 1, Jason Bourne to Aaron Cross, The Bourne Legacy. The Bourne trilogy was a major action powerhouse in the mid-noughties, revolutionizing the genre's style to the point that even James Bond aped it for a while. Central to all of this, though, was Matt Damon's amnesiac hero blasting his way through fights almost unaware of how he was able to kick so much ass in the first place. And it was great. But after Ultimatum, what was left for the character? Well, literally nothing. So is it any surprise that Damon refused to return? No, not at all. I mean, did this stop Universal? No, not at all. The studio opted to go for a universe-building route and follow a different spy, this time Aaron Cross, played by Jeremy Renner. Now, he's not terrible and did provide Legacy with at least a bit of grit, but as a film, it felt completely soulless. A non-Bourne film doesn't make sense. That's like trying to take a horse out of one of your mother's adult films. It's the key selling point. And it doesn't help that the hero they chose is so bland that you don't even want to know about his past. At least the studio realized this mistake and managed to convince Damon to gear up one last time, just like old Chestnut did in The Bone Wanderer 5. What an epic. Also, my one per list.